Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here is your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Wilson. It is Wednesday, October 5th, 2022. And today I am honored to welcome Ruthie Giles to our People in Fundraising Professional Conversations podcast. Ruthie, how are you?
Doing good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's
Great
to see you, and thank you for being a guest today.
Oh, no problem. This is fun.
Yeah, thank you. Ruthie, by way of introduction, is the Associate Director of Advancement Services at Westfield State University. She's been there for about 3 years. She's also an Associate of Prospect Development at Staupell Analytics Group. And I think this is your 1 year anniversary there.
1 year.
Dynamite. Did they give you a day off or some way to celebrate that?
We went to New Orleans not that long ago for a conference, so I got to eat New Orleans food. So I'm thinking that's the treat I had.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Ruthie and I know each other through the prospect development universe in nonprofits. And in addition to the titles and institutions I just mentioned, Ruthie also has a credential that I think would be important for our audience to hear about. And that is that she has the BCRE/Pro credential. And Ruthie, do you want to explain what that is, please?
Yeah, so it's a black bond credential specifically for Razor's Edge, and they have a couple levels of credential you can get, and that one's the highest one they have, I guess. So it's the professional level. They have I forget what the first one's called. Fundamentals, I think, is the first one, and then the second one is the professional. It just means you've taken a lot of classes, so you should know your stuff.
Dynamite. Well, having gone through fundamentals and stopping there, I know just how intense that program is. So congratulations. And you've used those credentials and your institutional knowledge and your passion for the prospect development community in ways that I really find admirable in the ways that you talk about and share knowledge and best practices on LinkedIn and ProspectL. You've mentioned just presenting recently in New Orleans, and I know that you're active at APRA conference presentations with chapters. So way to go. You are a prospect management rock star. So
thank you.
That's terrific. And I think another thing that's important is that we're both kind of mid-career professionals. And before we went live with our recording, Ruthie and I were talking about that, just the importance of sharing our knowledge, sharing best practices. And the podcast for me is an outlet to spotlight people like Ruthie who are doing amazing and valuable things in our profession. So my hat's off to you, Ruthie.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything you want to cover about your institutions first before we jump into the first question? Anything I didn't address?
No, just I live in Western Massachusetts. So I've worked primarily in that area, sort of the New England and even more specifically Western Mass area. For the places I work doing my sort of in-person full-time jobs. And then the Staupell, that's allowed me to work with a bunch of different organizations literally all over the world. So it's, so that's been kind of fun to do too as sort of my side hustle. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So I do get around.
Dynamite. Well, with that, sense of where you are today, if we could rewind, and Ruthie, if you want to just spend a few minutes sharing with our audience how you entered the nonprofit world, if that was right with prospect development from the get-go, or if at some point you transitioned from other roles, I'd love to hear how that all
Sure.
transpired.
Yeah, so it's not a it's not a story that has a straight line. Like straight out of undergraduate work, I was working in the for-profit sector, um, so much so that I actually got my first master's degree in MBA, thinking I was going to stay in the for-profit sector.
Oh,
But, things change and life never goes as you plan it. So a few years after getting the MBA, I was kind of looking for professional change. And I saw an ad in the newspaper, which that kind of tells you how long ago this was. Um, an ad in the newspaper, and there was a small boarding school in the area looking for just the title researcher.
oh,
Um, and working in a boarding school sort of spoke to me because I went to one when I was a kid,
mm,
up in Maine. And so that right there got my attention. And then as I read the description, I'm like, huh, this kind of sounds like me. Digging around
mm,
for information and finding stuff, writing it up, giving it to people. I'm like, I can do that. So
yeah.
so I applied for the job with no experience in fundraising I didn't even know what prospect research was, but the job just
Mm.
said researcher. It didn't even use the word prospect. Um, I applied for the job. I was fortunate that the hiring committee actually saw some sort of spark in me and took a chance on me, and they hired me. And I just sort of
Mm.
took to it like a fish to water, and I just loved it. So, sometimes in life you just sort of stumble into things, and this was sort of that serendipitous moment of like, I didn't plan it, I didn't even know what it was, and then there I was doing the work. So, fast
Awesome.
forward 20 years later, and here we go.
Wow.
Yeah.
And going back 20 years, 'cause that's about when I entered the profession as well. Um, were you past the days of going to like the local library or the
Oh no.
county? No?
No, 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 no. There weren't a lot of online resources. There were some.
Yeah,
It's not like it is now.
yeah,
There were some online. There were a few you had to pay for. The information wasn't great or well like curated so that you could find it. Like it wasn't a one-stop shopping like Lexis. Lexis did exist, but like folks use donor search or iWave or those kind of things, and it's pretty
yeah,
well curated. And you just type in a name and you get some stuff in the mail.
yeah.
So I remember driving to Albany. I remember driving to Hartford. Again, I'm in Western Massachusetts. I would go over to the University of Massachusetts, which is the largest university in the area, to go
Mm,
to their libraries to look for like one specific book resource, books.
yeah.
Yeah. So that was fun. But
Interesting, man.
yeah, the
And
back of the
how
days
the
we needed
field has
like a
changed.
copy card and all that stuff to get there. Yeah.
Oh, the copy card. My goodness, I
Remember
remember
those?
those.
Oh my God. Yeah. Back in the olden times.
Oh man. Okay, so you started at the boarding school, and how
Yep.
long were you there before you went on to your next place?
Um, I was at that one for like 6 years, worked at another boarding school for another 6 years, small hiatus at a Jewish foundation, and then up to the college university level I went after that. So
Okay.
yeah. So it's again not quite a straight line to anything, but I
Yeah.
learned things along the way at each place. So, and that's how I came into prospect management, which is a thing I love. It didn't exist when I started doing this work. Like there were not like the words prospect management didn't go together like peanut butter and jelly like they do now, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing. So I just wanted to make things more efficient, more effective. Like we needed to be able to track things better, to record them better, to measure, to report out. And there was sort of this sloppy way of doing things. I'm like, we can be
Mm.
so much better at this. So I just started building project management systems before I knew I was building them. I was just
Mm.
looking for efficiencies at that point.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
So how, if you can recall, how did you go about building something that wasn't an industry standard at the time?
It was mostly just questions. I would talk with
Mm.
gift officers or, I was at small boarding schools, not massive organizations. So you could talk right to the top person and say, okay, what is it you're trying to measure? What is it we're trying to do? What do we want to do better?
Yeah.
And then she would tell me, and I would say, okay, great. Let me figure out how I can help you on my end of the things through the
Mm.
data, through the research, through the information to help you achieve that. And
Mm.
and a lot of it was like, okay, we're not even recording this piece of data, or we're recording it, but it's not pulling out in a way that makes sense because it's in the wrong place, or
Mm.
it's great to know that they're in a certain cultivation stage, but how long have they been there? Because there's no date associated with it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so all those sorts of things, I'm like, okay. And then working with the databases from times of old, all they didn't all have the fields they do now. Like now folks can like build whatever they want in certain databases. I'm thinking like Salesforce, you can create custom objects, custom fields, custom this, custom that. You can build in anything you want, you know. The world is your oyster for some of these databases. Back
Yeah.
then, not so much. So it's like, okay, which field can I repurpose to force it to record the stuff I want in the way I need it so it'll pull out right, even if it's in the wrong place in the database. I just
Mm,
need it in there someplace.
yeah.
So yeah, so thinking about the systems, thinking about the database, trying to get it to work better so that I could actually tell the gift officers like, you don't need a portfolio of 500 people. That's just crazy town. Maybe we get you down to like 200 and
Yeah.
let's focus on the folks who are most important, which is still a way too big portfolio. But back then, you know, they were carrying massive portfolios because they were thinking, I think, I believe the thinking was that if they had enough volume of prospects in the portfolio, something would shake out.
Yeah.
Like, well, yeah, sure, eventually, or we can do this better. So,
Right.
yeah, I didn't like that idea. So I just sort of quietly started changing things to help them. Yeah.
Well, as you were talking, Ruthie, I had a question in my mind, and you may have answered it without knowing it. Just at the very end, you talked about quietly building it out in your mind and in the database. Were there people that looked at what you were doing with acceptance and encouragement, or was there some resistance or hesitation because, you know, again, as you mentioned back then, there was less emphasis on best practices around portfolio size and such. So if you can just talk about, you know, how what you were building quietly was received by the people you worked with directly and maybe the leadership as well.
So the good and the bad thing about doing things sort of the slow, quiet way is no one notices what you're doing until it's too late. It's like the only analogy I can think of in my head now is a terrible one about boiling a frog. And we've all heard that one, so let's not go there. But you just do it so quietly and slowly. And I wasn't really looking at the beginning for like big, massive change, like back in the early
Mm,
days of doing this. I was just like, we should be able to record this. They should be able to figure this out. We should be able to tell them, you know, who
yeah.
in California are the 6 people they need to go see and when they should go see them and what they should be talking about and how much, you know, like, you know, I wanted to give them the strategy they needed. So they just went and did their thing.
Mm.
And because I'm always thinking that way, which is a little annoying for people like me because I never sleep. But there were some people who sort of understood what I was doing and others who just thought, oh, she's just making, you know, making places to hold extra data so we have more information.
Mm.
And
Okay.
so some people saw the small granular pieces I was doing and appreciated that. Some people understood sort of where I was trying to go and didn't mind it. And some people just
Okay.
didn't even notice what I was doing because it wasn't really on their radar until it was sort of already done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they
Okay.
didn't notice it was happening, which I think is okay.
Yes.
But like if you go and try to create like project management now in an office and you don't have buy-in from the top, you can still, I mean, you can absolutely do it. It takes a long time. I think the
Yeah.
first, you know, the first organization I worked with, I was there for 6 years and I wasn't done when I
Wow.
left there putting together everything I thought they needed. So,
Yeah. Mm.
and yeah, but also like in the first year or two, I was still learning because again, I came not from a fundraising background and nobody there could tell me what prospect research was. They just hired me to do it. And they hadn't had someone like that before. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to blaze my own trail here.
That's right. Yes. Excellent. So how did you get connected with Staupell?
I'm so I've known Marianne Pelletier, who is the head of Staupell. I've known her on and off on. There was never an off through the years, just through NEDRA, the APRA
Yeah.
chapter in New England. And you know, first I would go to her presentations and I think, wow, she's really cool because she's so smart. And she knows all the information and she has this really cool dry humor that I get.
Yeah.
And, I went to her in sort of like admiration. I loved going to her sessions at NEDVA conferences because I'm like, I'm going to learn something from this woman.
Yeah.
And I always did. And I always, and there was more than I could learn because the stuff she was doing was so far beyond what I was able to implement at the place I was. I'm like, okay, I'll take the first 5 nuggets of what she was teaching in that session, and the next 12 nuggets I'll have to wait for.
Yeah.
And, and we would chit chat or sit together at lunches and stuff. And I'm not really sure. I think I got on her radar after a little while too, just because she was seeing, things I was presenting, stuff I was posting on LinkedIn. So there was a little back and forth here and there, and then like through the Prospect L, sharing information, responding back and forth to each other kind of stuff. And then one day she just called me and she's like, hey. And it was funny because when she called, well, she didn't call. We all just email, right? No one uses the phone anymore. But when she reached out, I think I read it wrong at first. And I fully admit this. Like, I read it thinking, oh, she's looking for me to help her figure out who she should hire for her organization. And I thought, well, I'm a weird person for her to ask for that advice, but I'll talk to her. And then I read it again later after it already said, sure. And we set up a Zoom meeting, and read it again later. I'm like, wait, I think she's asking me. Because it just never occurred to me. It was, yeah. So,
that's
that
good.
was, yeah. Again, serendipitous craziness just happening in my world that I don't plan.
Oh, that's good. I like having that history. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Ruthie, I want to go back to a couple of things you mentioned. One was just the time it took to build prospect management infrastructure in your roles, but also that sense of giving back to the community through being very visible and active on LinkedIn and presenting at conferences and such, as someone who has been doing prospect management for 20 years. So is there a specific moment or a project where you felt that you were hitting your stride in prospect management? And I want to add that there's a quote from the famous jazz musician that sometimes you have to play a long time to be able to play like yourself. So as you think back on your career and building things out and learning along the way, do you have moments that was like, okay, like I'm getting it, the people I'm doing this for are starting to see the light of day?
Yeah, there was an actual moment.
Oh, awesome.
Which is funny because usually for me there isn't. But for this there was. So in 2013, I was hired at the end of it. Like, it was between Thanksgiving and Christmas time, so late November, early December. I was hired by Mount Holyoke College for a position that was specifically to create the prospect management system. And I mean, that was like the quintessential mothership calling you home moment, right? Like, they didn't have it in place. They knew they needed it. I guess they tried to build some stuff before, but they just needed a person to do it because they had a smaller team. I think there were 3 people, someone had left, and then they retooled the position to be prospect management person. So the nice thing was I got to go in there and like build it from the ground up. I could concentrate everything on just prospect management. I didn't have to also do research and also pull lists and also do other things. I could just create the system. And at that point in time, it was the most beautiful prospect management system I'd ever created because I got to actually just focus right on the system. I wasn't pulled in other directions. My attention was totally focused. I could build it exactly the way it needed to be built for Mount Holyoke and exactly the way I knew it should be so that it would stand the test of time. Because you want to build what's going to work for now, but you also want to build what's going to work 5 and 10 years down the line and build enough space in there for it to build enough space in there for it to be flexible as the world changes around you. So so if it hadn't been for Mount Holyoke College, I probably wouldn't be the prospect management rock star that you see before you now, as it were. But like that was sort of like the break I needed to become exactly who I never realized I actually wanted to be.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I had a thought in my mind. I went to one of my kids' parent-teacher conferences last night, and the teacher had a bulletin board in his classroom, and it said, um, the purpose of goals is not to achieve them, it's to become the person you're meant to be as you work toward those goals.
Yeah.
And you basically said it in a different way there. That's so cool.
Yeah. And yet so true. Like this was not, if you'd asked me 20 years ago, where do you think you'd be in 20 years? This isn't it. But
Yeah.
this isn't bad. Not complaining. Just this wouldn't have been what I had predicted.
Yes, sure. Um, so while we're on the prospect management topic here, what are you, if you can narrow it down to one thing, if not, if there are several, what are you most passionate about with the prospect management responsibilities you have?
Oh, that's a big question, which doesn't have one answer. I mean, I don't think I could choose just one thing. Like I
Yeah.
just love what I do in project management. I love helping others learning how to do this too.
Mm,
Like I mentioned, I sort of came into this very organically. I didn't even know I was building systems, but I was building systems back in the day.
yeah.
Um, and you know, these days, what I really enjoy doing is just sort of sharing what I know and teaching it to others on how to build their own project management systems. Because
Mm,
there's so many nonprofits that aren't using project management yet, not because they're doing anything wrong, just because they don't have the staffing or they haven't had the time, all that sort of thing. And they're great organizations, and they're competing for the same philanthropic dollars as massive shops with big project management systems in place that have been in place for a while. So it
yeah.
puts them at that sort of competitive disadvantage. And I'm like, yeah, just because you're small doesn't mean you can't do this. So
Mm,
I want to sort of level the playing field. So those smaller orgs that are doing some really cool, interesting, very sort of niche fundraising work can compete with the big dogs. And I think there's
yeah.
enough out there for all of us. So it's not like, robbing from one to give to the other situation. There's enough out there for all of us, but we just need to bring them up to the same level so that we can all be there together.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
Yeah.
And um, it's nice to hear, again, like what infuses your enthusiasm for the work you do. So if we're going to take the opposite angle of that, with passion, enthusiasm, and just having that focus on prospect management and the career you've had, are there any specific challenges that you had to overcome to get where you are today? And you mentioned earlier you didn't think would be where you would be,
Oh yeah.
in your career. So anything
Yeah.
that comes to mind in that sense?
Oh my God, yes. Like one of the ones is like I'm an amazingly strong introvert. Like when you take those personality tests, you couldn't get more introverted than me. Like
Oh,
you really can't.
interesting.
Yeah. And coupled with that, I'm incredibly socially awkward. So obviously the thing that I do often is publicly speak, right? That doesn't make any sense. But yeah, and I know a lot of us in this field, we are introverts. So I'm probably not alone in this, like you're super introverted and yet you find yourself speaking publicly.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, like I'm introverted to the point like when the whole world shut down for the pandemic, I was like, yes, this is my thing. I loved it. I actually miss it. The isolation piece I miss, not the deadly pandemic part. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
but yeah, I've never felt and still don't to this day like a natural speaker.
Mm,
I get incredibly nervous for speaking to groups, even if I know the people well.
yeah.
Um, if we're at an in-person thing, if you ever see me like pacing and fidgeting and walking back and forth and running out of the room and coming back before I speak, that's just a thing I do to try to calm my nerves, and it totally doesn't work, but
Oh.
it distracts me. I know it doesn't work. I do it anyhow because I don't know what else to do with myself. But yeah, but it helps, sort of. But
Is that is the public speaking? I mean, part of it certainly is just the knowledge and the reputation you have in the industry. Is there also perhaps an element of whether it's a conscious or a subconscious effort to overcome or combat your natural tendencies?
To a degree. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's funny. I was thinking this morning, there was a teacher I had in high school, and we did these. So I went to boarding school. Things were a little different. However, they pay stuff. We did these sort of intensive weeks in the winter. I forget what they called it, like 4-point program, whatever that means. But each class, freshman, sophomore, junior, did something different. My senior year, we did sort of this, self-reflective, psychological, weird thing. At any rate, there was a teacher in my group who, at the end, we were all supposed to talk about, share what you think about each person in your group and how they've grown during the week. It totally wasn't even my thing.
Yeah.
And so now everyone in the room has to go around and say something about me, which this is not my comfort zone, and this is not how I like to be spoken about or with. So I'm already uncomfortable. And then this teacher, who I hope she was just having a bad day, because hopefully this wasn't how she behaved normally, but she went off on me because I had been so quiet during the week.
Oh, goodness.
A week where we're supposed to be sharing our feelings, which isn't what I do. So she just totally went off on me and was telling me how I'll never make anything of myself. I'll never be successful. And I was thinking about that this morning. I'm like,
goodness.
Well, like, it's so nice to be underestimated sometimes. Like, and not that I've not thought of her often or much. I don't know why it came to me this morning, but it just did. And I was like, yeah, I was very much underestimated. Probably not just by her. She's just the only one who had a very loud voice about it. So,
wow.
Yeah. So
well, if they could see you now, that's, yeah.
They could. I'll have to send her the podcast later. Remember me?
That's right.
No. I mean, she was a great teacher. Don't get me wrong. I think she was just having a grouchy day.
Yeah, and I think we all can relate to those moments when a mentor or a teacher or a relative, whatever the case may be, called us out in a way that hurt, certainly at the time, and maybe it still carries some sting to it, but could also be very motivating, over the long term. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And now, if we could project into the future, because you spent a great deal of time generously talking about your career to date, Ruthie. Are there any particular goals or ambitions you have, or whether it's a specific project or a topic you'd like to present on in the future and need to formulate the idea more? Anything in those ways, like as you look ahead?
Yeah, so 2 goals really. So my attainable goal, which I'm pretty sure I can do, is I want to write the book on project management. Literally write the book. I've said some false starts over the last couple of years, but I'm gonna do it.
Yes, you will.
Yeah. and thank you to some folks who I've been working with. They're sort of pushing and prodding me to keep moving in that direction. So it will happen. I'm a slow writer, but it will happen. So that's one of my goals. And then my sort of more lofty goal, and I don't know that this is attainable in my lifetime. I want to reshape the entire organizational chart for fundraising, because I believe, and this might be just me alone in this thinking, most nonprofits have a structure that's based on how fundraising was done decades ago. And it's very sort of like, top, the top person speaks down to those, and and yet when you talk to people, they're like, we're working as a team, we're collaborating, and but the org chart doesn't look that way, right? It's one person at the top lording down towards the others, even if the person at the top doesn't actually feel that way. So I feel like the org chart needs an absolute refresh to be more of a hub. Now I would put project management research right in the center, and analytics, and then have it feed out to all the other places. I don't know that leadership will ever come around to my way of thinking. I don't think that I'm entirely wrong. I'm probably a little bit wrong, but not entirely wrong. But I think the org chart needs a refresh. I think they actually need to figure out where to put prospect research and management and data analytics, because they keep stuffing us into these other cubby holes that aren't us. Right? Oh, you're under leadership gifts. Oh, you're under advancement services. No, we are our own thing. Just admit it. Just make them our
Yes.
own thing. Give us our own space. And please, let's be done with the hierarchical looking org chart because it's such an antique. But again, that is my lofty goal that will probably not happen in my lifetime. So,
Well, there is someone that I'd like to connect with you with offline about that.
cool.
So I think there may be at least some simpatico mindset and ambition. This person doesn't work directly in prospect management and research, but has expressed some similar sentiments. So I'll make a note for that. And yeah, I mean, in my career, prospect research was housed under business operations and finance, advancement services. We were under donor relations for a while. So your point is well made.
Yeah, it's all the wrong places.
Yes. Yeah. And finally, after 23, almost 23 years, I now report to, well, I did until a recent org shift at my day-to-day employer, Weber State University. I reported to the director of major gifts. And I felt like that's where I had been aspiring to for years. And it felt like perhaps the most relevant fit. But even then,
Close.
it's
But you
but
shouldn't be
it's
reporting to them. You should be equal with them.
yeah,
Mm,
yeah.
yeah. In your own little thing on their silly little chart. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
But you're getting closer.
That's right. And yeah, and if I can help in any way with either of those endeavors, please feel free to reach out to me, because I think no person can do it all themselves.
Mhm.
And I think you're wise to already have, as you mentioned, a few people encouraging you on with this book. I think that will just be such a gift to the institution and to the people coming up in our profession. So I'm cheering you on for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ruthie, we're almost at the half-hour mark. Anything you would like to share as part of the conversation that we haven't covered yet?
No, I mean, I just, I love the work that I do. I've sort of find it interesting. I fell into sort of niche little profession, out of which other niche professions have grown. Like we started with research, now we have analytics, management. I'm sure there'll be something else as well. And, while all these places, are starting to add research and project management to their org charts and to their staffing, they don't actually teach this anywhere, do they? Right? Like
Yeah.
you can go to classes and you can get your degree in nonprofit stuff, but not specifically what we do. And our stuff is so very technical in a lot of ways. Like, we all came into this profession with no specific training for it and without any well laid out roadmaps. And yeah, so like what I love about your podcast series is just hearing how many other people have, how they've come into this industry and how they learned and what their journey was. And it's amazing how many like diverse, brilliant people in our field there are. And, it's really cool to be part of that profession. And then we just have to sort of continue to pave the way for those coming behind us. Because I got to retire one day, right? We were talking this earlier. I got to retire one day. And I have to make sure that there is a small herd of amazing project management people right behind me who are going to be way better than I am. So I just have to make sure that we arm this profession with that as we exit someday.
Yes. Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, because before we went live, Ruthie and I were talking about a few people specifically that we admire in the industry who are past the mid-career point. And Ruthie and I have both been doing prospect management and research for 20 plus years. And so that's one reason why I started this podcast, is to capture the stories. And I need more people who are past the midpoint career to spotlight them first and foremost. But also, as a resource for people coming up into the profession. And I think your book and your enthusiasm are ways to honor both the people that have come before and to give back and help the people coming up behind us, because that's really important as well.
Exactly. We all got to stand on somebody's shoulders. So
yes. Just as a last question, Ruthie, if you were sitting in my chair, and thank goodness for you that you're not, because there's like a puppy upstairs and we're in Utah and it's pretty dry out here. But and I have a Yankees hat, which I'll explain in a moment behind me. So thank goodness you are where you're at. What topic would you like to see a future guest address in this podcast series?
I think something we've been talking, I think what you were talking about just a moment ago, like get sort of those sort of our forebearers in this field, if you were, and it's not like they're old, good Lord, but like get Elizabeth Crabtree, get Valerie Fazio, get Marianne Pelletier, get Helen Brown, like get them to do this. I think it would be really interesting to hear how they cut their teeth into this field.
Yeah.
And because some of them have, and others, there's plenty I didn't even name, right, have done some amazing work and sort of laid the foundation upon which we're treading right now. And the people behind us won't even, like, there'll be a time where someone doesn't even know them personally because they will have retired.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to capture their stories, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me, when I was on the NEDRA board, and you're on the NEDRA board right now, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was on the NEDRA board in 2015, 2016. I was nominated by Tim Enman, who we both know, Western Mass data guy. And I wanted to talk with someone who she had won the very first, I believe it's the very first, one of the awards from NEDRA. And this was like in the late 80s, I believe, is when she won the award. And she worked at Brandeis for most of her career. And the timing was just bad. Like, she had retired a year or two earlier, and I didn't have the connections to, connect with her directly for a while. And I wanted to spotlight her for a NEDRA newsletter. And by that point, I think it was like, she's living her retirement life and, just prefers to keep it that way. And I think it was Judy Rothenberg, I think was her name. And I think it was like the first or second Ann Castle Award winner in NEDRA. And so, yeah, like, that's an example of someone that it would have been great to have captured her story a bit. Because, yeah, like, as you were mentioning a few people by name, I think we both could rattle off, a half dozen or a dozen more people as well. And it's important to acknowledge we are here professionally in part because of what they've done for the industry, and to capture their memories, recollections, challenges, while they're still in the profession and before they rightfully go off and enjoy the next phase of their life. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Ruthie, thank you so much. You've just been a delightful guest, and we've covered a great range of topics today. So thank you very much for being on the program today.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I love this.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Likewise. And I have to do this, and it will take the fun out of it. I lost a bet to my son last night. This is the New York Yankees cap. I'm a Red Sox fan. We bet that Aaron Judge would not break the American League home run record in a season, and he did last night. So congratulations to him. I have to go basically everywhere with this Yankees cap for the next week because I lost the bet.
Well, at least you're not in New England anymore, so it's safer.
That's right. Well, again, thank you, Ruthie, for your time today. And for our audience, you can find Ruthie's conversation on our website, peopleinfundraising.com, as well as on LinkedIn on a Monday later this month. So, Ruthie, thank you so much and have a great day.